In this week's pod, we were joined by Micah Piippo to discuss planning projects past, present, and future. Micah has spent the last 14 years in project controls. While he's performed a wide variety of roles, his passion and main focus is planning and scheduling. During his career, he's torn down nuclear facilities, built large ferries, built data centers all over the world, and more recently is helping Intel deliver state-of-the-art fabric of capabilities. In December 2022, Micah started writing his Zero Float newsletter. In the newsletter, Micah explores his favorite topics that he doesn't see getting enough attention. Really enjoyable podcast tonight, Marco. Again, thanks for stepping into Dale and Val's shoes.
It was a pleasure.
Your favorite subject, planning.
It
Really
is.
interesting guest. Has some really interesting views on particularly the future. I quite enjoyed that bit and some good challenge there. What were the main takeaways for you?
I think we are all aligned in the field of project control planning, where we see the need, of an education and kind of how this data should be used and the problems around it. I think we just need a little bit probably more unity in doing, in pursuing that, so that we can come to then a conclusion which is kind of the correct for the most, not for everybody, but for the most at least.
Yeah, definitely. We talked around some things around does planning have a marketing problem? That we talked through some issues there. Differences between planning and scheduling. There's some cultural differences there between USA and Europe, which I didn't quite realize. And some topics around the future, so AI and machine learning. I won't spoil everything for our listeners, but really interesting episode, fascinating guest. Again, thanks a lot for
Absolutely.
We understand construction. I think how we can help is identifying that risk up front and enabling the transparency that our tools bring to the table.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. Always great to have you with us. Both Dale and Val are still away this week, so you're stuck with me again. Dale is somewhere in South Africa without electricity at the moment. So to replace him, we're joined by a very special guest, a veteran of the show, Mr. Marco Frizenda. How are you today?
Good evening. Very well. Always a pleasure.
Good. I think this is your fourth time now, so you must like it. Probably
Oh, it's quite. It's always good conversations. So.
good. We've got a planning-based episode for you tonight, so hopefully some interesting topics to get your teeth into. And we're joined this week by Micah Piippo, who is going to talk to us about planning projects past, present, and future. Sounds interesting. Micah, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Doing well. You nailed my name, which is surprising. So you've already gotten a gold star right out of the gates.
Brilliant. One better than Val. Okay, so if we can start by taking us through a bit of your kind of career and general experience today, where did it all start for you then, Micah?
Yeah. Oh man, where did it start? So yeah, I was working, in a credit collection company in like the turn of the recession. I don't know what year it was, maybe like 2008, 2009. And my job was literally calling people up and asking them for money. And if they didn't have the money and it was the recession, so a lot of people didn't, these small companies, I'd have to send them to collections, which would be a big hurt for their business. And turns out that's not a great job to be in for your mental health. I don't like doing it. And so um, my father worked at a nuclear facility in Tri-Cities, Washington, and he just kind of, hey, there's potentially some stimulus money coming here. You should put your resume in at a couple of these places. And I did. And a company called me up and was like, do you want to do construction scheduling? And I'm like, yeah, sounds okay. And then they told me how much they were going to pay me. And I think it was like 20 grand more than I was making at the time. And I was like, I'll see you on Monday. And I didn't even negotiate. And then from there, I really just dove into the career. I loved it. I worked at a couple of nuclear facilities. They're all tearing the buildings down. I worked at a gravitational wave observatory. So that was a place where they were trying to figure out if black holes really existed. Then from there, I went to a shipyard and I worked there for a couple of years building large scale ferry boats. So these are 144 car ferries that run in the Seattle Puget Sound, and they take, passengers back and forth. And I never built boats before. That was such an awesome experience. And then after that, convinced Google to hire me on their data center program. I still don't really know how that worked out. Like I somehow convinced them that a boat was just like a data center. I'm like, yeah, it's got like cooling and stuff, right? Like, and then that's where I spent 8 years of my career. And I started on a very small data center team that we grew to be a bigger team, and we got to deliver projects all over the globe. And there was a lot of appetite to try new things and get you in different roles and positions. And so I really got to do a whole wide world of project controls in that experience. And then about a year and a half ago, I transitioned to Intel. And so now I'm a scheduling integration manager there, where I focus mostly on progressive builds. That's our smaller program that basically looks at retrofitting buildings and some of those projects. So not the big greenfield buildings, but there's a lot of turnover in the semiconductor space to keep these facilities at top notch. So yeah, that's a little bit of highlight about me. I don't know if that covers it.
Nice, quite a rounded experience there.
It's been a wild journey. It's just a lot of luck in there.
Yeah, I mean, to be selected by Google, there must be something a bit more than luck in there. Must be some skill. So the theme of the pod tonight is around planning projects, past, present, and future. So what do you mean by that? Maybe if we start with the past, what is the thing?
Yeah, I think that you got to have a strong understanding of where you've been to understand where you're going, right? What are the current challenges that we see historically that are leading us to the point where we're at now, so then we can look at what's coming for the future. And so, the theme of this was to talk a little bit about two things I'm very passionate about: education, because I think that plays a lot in the past and present, and how we'll see scheduling and planning, shape in the future, and then also technology, which we can't escape right now. And so I posted an article on LinkedIn with an image of what I kind of see as the scheduling timeline, if you will. And I broke it down into 3 phases. And it basically said pretty much anything prior to computers is kind of basic concepts and knowledge, right? So we had CPM back in the day, we had Gantt charts back in the day, we had line of balance back in the day. But these weren't done on computers, right? People were doing with pen and paper. And there's some days I go into work and I'm like, can we just do that? Why don't we just go back to pen and paper, right? Like, you can't. And then computers came into play, right? And that's probably your phase 2. And this is probably a little bit more of the present, although I think we're just kind of hitting off into phase 3. And so phase 2 is really, that's the advent of Oracle, right? And Primavera P6, that's the advent of, like smart sheets now and the cloud-based piece, right? It's all software-based, right? And you did have Lean and Last Planner come in that aspect right now. And I kind of lump those, even though the pitchforks will probably come out, I do lump those more into the software now, right? There's a lot of companies that sell software that help facilitate that. And then when I look at towards the future in phase 3, to me, that's where we're starting to see, all right, now we have advanced capture capabilities. That's the visual-based progressing, right? Walking around with the 360 cameras and things like that. And then you have advanced compute. And so to me, we've probably seen a lot about and talked a lot about ChatGPT, but I think there are a lot more capabilities there that will enable bigger things in the future. And so that's how I look at it across the timeline, just that kind of pre-computers, computers, and now we're entering into this like crazy compute space.
So can I ask you a question? So, education, and for planning especially, so let's focus once on planning, because it can be applied to other, but let's say planning is probably the most difficult one. How would you see the education? And now I tell you the reason of this question, because we are transitioning from people which should have known very well construction. So in the past, let's say, the big thing for a planner was actually to know, for example, in construction, how the construction was, kind of having an understanding of the sequencing, what is involved, clearly commercial and other stuff. Now we are transitioning towards, as you said, and I agree, because we are doing it already, database, the clouds. And so the skill set of a planner has to change quite dramatically, in a sense of the basic remains the basic. So you obviously still need to have, the basic understanding. But what I see is more and more, this data-driven way of doing planning, because now the data are available, and not only available, you can use them. But there is so many data that you go more into a data scientist kind of role. That's the reason I was wondering how you see the education, because it's not that straightforward in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I think that because there is a lack of education, that you are seeing what I would say some fundamentals fall off the map. And since there's a high demand for schedulers, and you think about what's hard to pick up, the hardest thing to pick up to me is an understanding of actual construction, right? Like that's why people would go to a university and get, in America, they call it construction management degrees. I'm not sure, they have different titles from around the globe, but that's your basic, this is how you do construction. They teach you all the ins and outs, and you get a very nice, I wouldn't say high level, but a nice overview of the topic, right? So that's the hardest thing to get. But since there's such a high demand for schedulers, you don't necessarily need to have that anymore because it's software and data driven, right? And so if I was going to be king for a day and say this is like the perfect, schedulers kind of curriculum, whatever, first off, it needs to become a university degree, right? And the reason why I say that is not because of necessarily the training the scheduler gets, but because of the research and importance that it gets put on in the academia, right? Like if you go into Google Scholar and you start researching white papers for things like that, you'll find that people will be in a parallel field, or will just pop in and write a scheduling white paper and move on, right? So there's not a what I would say a continuous stream of knowledge or continuity going on, right? And so then that is probably the most important. But then if you lay out what the curriculum should be, right, there should be a strong understanding of construction, right? But then there also needs to be like, what is, how do projects really deliver? What is the project ecosystem? Because that's what a lot of, I think, planners don't get outside of this is how things are built, is this is how a project lives and breathes, right? You have funding, you have permitting, you have roles and responsibilities, project managers, project directors, the CX person, like that is a whole organism in himself. And then I would say, yeah, you need to actually be really strong in technologies these days. And if you are, that's how you shoot up the ladder, right? If you know a little bit of coding and can crush Power BI and Tableau, I mean, you just became one of the most valuable schedulers in the world easily, right? Like just how this world works right now and how it pops out. And if you're even a step further ahead on those and you can actually use them to create value, right? Not just data for data's sake, but you can sit down with the schedule and maybe you can sit down with the BIM model and you can look at some other, data sources, foots in the door. Maybe you have some accounting information. You can pull all that together and be like, hey, listen, wait a second, something's kind of getting a little wonky on our mechanical, in section 2. If we optimize this resources, we could save $1 million or something like that. I mean, that is where I would go with the education piece of it.
Yeah. Sorry, Martin. I'm going to be a bit provocative. What you are describing is a whole set of knowledge that is not only learned, kind in an academic environment. Why I'm saying this and I'm kind of laughing is because, one thing is understanding first of all, understanding the data, because that's for me one of the key things that nowadays is kind of starting to go into the second part, which for me is a real danger. So people have all this data, came out with fantastic charts and everything, and then they don't really know if the chart makes sense or not. So sometimes there's some really interesting outputs.
Hey, but it looks really good.
Oh, that's for sure.
That's a skill in that.
Oh yeah, it's a skill. But then when you start to say, optimizing or challenging, as you correctly said, for me, that's, you start to need, I don't know how to say this, it's almost impossible to learn it just from academia. So when you have, 10 years of experience, you have dealt with contractual issues, with technical issues, with different, kind of sequences, that's when obviously you can have this appreciation for what you were talking about. The academia will give you, well, has always done, gives you the basics. And even as an engineer, I remember when I had my engineering degree, I went to speak with my father, which was an engineer since 30 years. And he had basically to teach me certain things from scratch, even though I had a fantastic, piece of paper. So that's
Yeah,
my
yeah,
question to you. How would you do that in with the planning, with the planner, which normally and unfortunately for him is at the center of everything. It's not just specialized in one thing, but it's actually
yeah.
putting together everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair question and amazing, and that's why I don't think it stops at university degrees, right? It's not like here's your piece of paper, everything's fixed and solved in the world. Look at our top certification companies right now, right? You have the PMI and you have AACE, and then I think you probably have everybody else after that, right? And you to me, I go look at what they're providing, right? And it's very much not what you're talking about. It's very much leaned more back towards the university thing, right? Oh, to pass our test, you need to go look at how and tell us how total float's calculated. This actually reminded me, going back to, we can talk about historical university experiences. I remember one of my last courses in college was this just pain of a course. It was a finance course. I got a business degree because they don't have scheduling, so you all come from random backgrounds. Um, but it was a finance course, and in the course, I was literally writing out by hand, like doing an ROI analysis on a business and an amortization schedule and doing all the like interest, blah blah blah, right? On a piece of paper, multiple of them. I remember they used to give you like 20 pieces of paper, right? Then you graduate, and I sit down and I go into Excel and I'm like, oh, I just need to type enter, like enter amortization or enter like ROI or enter, and it's like, well, wait a second, what am I doing here? And so I think there is a lot of space for potentially even a new organization to come up through the pipes, because I just don't see the PMI and AACE evolving too much. I mean, they're kind of cash cows that it seems like they're very certification based, and that's kind of where they're going to go. And so there is that extra thing, and there's not something right now that is available for people. And I mean, it's needed, right? Like, what's that kind of space that takes you from entry level scheduler that then gets you up to the senior and higher level director manager, right? There's no career coaching. This is all tribal knowledge. I run into a guy like Marco in a bar, and, oh, I'm a scheduler too. And you like lay out the blueprint for me. And I'm like, okay, now I got it. Right. Yeah, you just don't find it. So I think it's a totally fair question that you asked. And I think that there's still a gap to kind of cover that educational piece of it.
So could I ask a question on that? On the Dale sent me a link to the Plan Rich website and some quite bold statements on there about planners being, you can get $250,000 for a scheduler at Google, Facebook. So what is it that really separates the real top end schedulers from the kind of entry level mid range ones, like you say there?
Yeah.
So most people are
Well,
dealing without having a degree in it.
yeah,
So
I mean, I think you got to define it's the website and the marketing materials punch you for a reason, right? It's is we want to get eyeballs and we want to get views on it, and that's we're trying to fill that gap a little bit that I was just talking about. But I think you need to define, like, do you think that dollars separate top end schedulers and planners, or is it like skill levels or whatever? But let's just say we're using dollars as the metric to define them, right? Well, what would separate someone not being able to land one of those jobs, right? Okay, then you go down that path. Well, how do you land a job at the Google, Facebook, or getting paid 250K a year? And to me, that is a set of skills. And so you're going to need a body of work behind you, right? But you're also going to need a set of skills. You're going to need to be a master planner and scheduler, right? Check. You're going to need to know all the ins and outs of planning and scheduling. And I think that's top to bottom, right? All the way down to knowing how to like operate a lean workshop, all the way to the top of I need to plan out, 100, $500 million data centers, right? And then there's some, I would say, out of the scheduling, you then need to have like a decent breadth of project controls experience, right? And the cost side, the contract side, and some things like that, right? And then once you get that, right, you're going to need skills that no one in the construction industry will probably ever teach you or show you, right? You're going to need to, how do you communicate? How do you present an idea? How do you build a team? How do you drive impact and success and then communicate that vertically, right? How do you work horizontally across your organization with your peers, right? And so those are a lot of the skills that I just was fortunate working at Google that they bring along with you through trainings and teachings, that help elevate your career. But then as I was looking around, I'm like, and no one else is teaching this stuff, right? No one else is getting this like Google university degree in some of these things. And so, I don't know if I answer your question, but I think that's kind of where my mind went on it.
Well, you answered, and I think you touched a very important topic, because I would have gone to this one. One thing is the technical part, but because of the nature of a planner, at whatever level, probably at the very entry level, not, but even there, the soft skill are probably what really sets apart, a planner, which knows the tool and knows what to do with it, from actually what I call, the storyteller. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, nobody really will go into Primavera or into Microsoft Project. You have 500,000 activities, and nobody will do
the
that.
dirty little secret. The dirty little
For some
secret.
people.
But it's very true, and everything goes then into how you interact, how you're able to show what the problem is, extrapolate the correct information, make sure that you deal with the right people because unfortunately you are in the middle of everything. So if somebody tells you, I'm going to deliver something on that date, and that date is then too late for the next which comes in, well, you are in the middle, and you need to find how to make it work, or whatever will be the decision. Do you think that there are, because honestly, I've done some trainings when I was in Alstom and then in GE for a brief period, but I've never really seen a training which actually targets specifically kind of stakeholder management, the conflict resolution, all the things that the planner, and believe me, if you have done a little bit of planning work, you will encounter. It's part of of the job description. I've never seen it. Do you think that in the States probably is different compared to Europe? But I've not even seen it in the States, to be honest. If a target specific.
No, and that's what Martin brought up. Is I think that's one thing we're going to really try and shoot for Plan Rich. So that is basically it's going to be a community focused set of trainings that are more career focused in nature. And so we have 3 different trainings we were planning to offer. We have a 0 to scheduler, scheduler to senior scheduler, and senior scheduler and beyond. Right. And so 0 to scheduler will be like, how do you land a job, and fairly basic things like that. Right. And it'll have a little bit of those in there, but you don't need them. But once you go scheduler to senior scheduler, it's all these things that we're talking about where it doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's spread out all over the internet. So you got to go on YouTube and LinkedIn. You got to find all these different sorts of trainings. And then you have to figure out, okay, let me look through this through the construction lens. Right? Because when they went and made these trainings, they weren't thinking the construction industry, which is a different environment. And so what we want to do is take a lot of that information and just make it, this is how you do it in the construction industry, right? So when I talk about, managing up and across, right? Well, in a typical organization, you might have your manager and then you have your like manager's friends, but on a project and working on a construction project, you're going to have your project manager, your project director, and then you're going to have a whole company of other people that are working on totally different projects that how do you actually communicate with? Because you're not going to bump into them in like the water cooler like other places. And so, to answer your question, I don't think it exists. I think it's a gap that's out there in the world. And I'm hoping, we can bring some training there to help supplement what's there and at least get people an idea of how to be successful in scheduling. Because we really just need all boats to raise up so we can get onto the fun stuff like technology and stuff like that, right? Because if we're just stuck with this, like the, the stereotypical like back of the construction scheduler, back of the construction trailer who is just sitting there waiting for the project manager to give him the spreadsheet so he can enter it into the computer, right? And then push F9 and then hand the project manager back the schedule so he can mark it up again and put it back in. We're not going to deliver projects on time. It's not going to get any better.
No, I agree. I mean, especially because it would be a waste of information nowadays with all the informations that are available. So I agree. Well, to me, the topic is interesting, but it's also very difficult because, as I said, each time it depends also in which project you are, in which company you are, depending on where you focus. So you have the more traditional construction work, like, I don't know, you're building, residential, for example, kind of works. This is a very construction focused. When you start then to go into data centers or, bigger projects where you have other interactions, that's where I must say the skills start to blur a little bit, because,
Yeah.
I've seen a difference from when I started to now. For example, when I started, it was, your job was very clear in the sense of that's the construction, that's how we do it. These are the people. Even the organization charts were simpler when I started. No, it's true. Let's be
They
honest.
fit on one page.
Exactly. And nowadays, you have I see more and more different specialization, which probably needs to be taken into account. The one which is more, let me say site, it's not completely site, but site driven. The one which is more data driven, because let's be honest, the skill set are very different.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Basics probably not probably basics are the same, but the skill set required are really different. So just giving, again, being a bit provocative, but just giving, one set of information, of knowledge, might still probably not be enough, especially if you don't then divide it into the other spheres where a project planner has to nowadays basically work in.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, provoke me all you want. I'll just end up better questions and help me rethink my thinking. So, no, I mean, yeah, we thought a little bit about this, and to me, if you take a step back a little bit, and then if you're able to take someone and say, okay, let me have you step back, and then you can look at the field and say, this is the field. Okay. On one end, you have last planner, daily tactical planning, right? And then as you move up the field, you have probably more what we call a scheduler, and then you have a planner, and then you probably have more of a strategic planner and data analyst and so forth, right? And here's the field at which you can go attack, right? Just giving someone that picture of the field empowers them to go figure out a little bit what they want to do and go specialize in. I think with the rate at which things are moving and the amount of products and technologies, it'll be really impossible to give someone because you used to be able to give people like a manual, right? And be like, here's scheduling, take your manual, right? But with what it is now, it's just going to be hard to do that. And so I think it's more illuminating people to here's your possibilities, what you can do. This is some of the things that could help you be successful in this, or even help you make the decision of what you want to do, right? Do you like being that boots? This is me. I like talking with people. I like working with people. I like being out on site on a project. And that's what I like to do, right? If you're that kind of person, you're probably going to skew a little bit to the right. Or as you move up the ladder, you want to stay a little bit on the right of that kind of scheduling planning role, right? If you're the kind of person who it's not really your thing, but you really love data, you really love analysis, you love solving problems, I think there's still a role in place for you, but that's probably going to skew a little bit left, right? You're going to be a little bit more data driven. Maybe as you go forth in your scheduling career, you want to look at, okay, I want to look into Power BI, I want to look into Tableau, but I want to also look into Python, right? I want to get into some of these nodes and links and end plans of the world, because this is just such a massive opportunity for people. And, there's all across the board. And just giving them the field, I think it help out a bit, right? But I don't know if you'd ever get to be able to give someone a manual these days now, because it's just too. And a great point you brought up earlier was different industries and different roles, right? If you go into commercial real estate, that is a much different animal than a program like Google that's going to spend $5 billion a year delivering data centers, Amazon, whoever, right? And so those are two different skill sets, right? Because you're more, and there's complexity in there too as well, right? Depending on there's a lot of commercial real estate doesn't even use a schedule because they got it pretty much, right? They've built enough high rises they can kind of do it without what we would probably call a proper schedule, And so, yeah, I mean, I think I just love it. It's a beautiful career, right? It's such a cool industry to work in that there's that much just interesting stuff going on.
Do you think there's a difference between cultures and countries in how we define planning and schedule? So do you think there's a difference between how they do it in the US versus the rest of the world? And obviously, Marco, interested in your thoughts on this as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, so for one, if I go to Europe, I'm called Mika, and they start calling me a planner instead of a scheduler. And so, I mean, I think Europe, just in my experience, and I worked in with Google, delivered some data centers in Ireland and Finland, and a couple other countries over there. And I do think there is a bit more distinction between the scheduler and planner role. There likes to be a lot of clarity of like, this is a scheduler, this is a planner. Um,
What would your definition of that be? Because you were kind of using the terms interchangeably there. Was that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do that. And I know that makes people in Europe just cringe. But when I do that, the reason why I'm doing that, because I'm talking about it as like the whole of things, right? When I say scheduler and planner, I'm doing it specifically, usually, unless I mess up, to say like, I'm just trying to cover everything, right? I don't want to say scheduler and then have someone in Europe think I'm just talking about scheduling or planning, say it's just planning, right? Like I'm just talking about it. I look at it as like one big sandwich, right? Um, and so if I defined it like the scheduler, right, I think the scheduler to me is more the tactical data entry type folk, who is, you know, boots on the ground, getting the plan and the schedule and calculating out the schedule. Now the planner could probably be best fit in America and more of like what people probably call pre-construction role, but I think they also dive into the project. They're just working at a little bit more zoomed out level and they're working across more stakeholders. And so to me, you know, a successful planner can, you know, where a scheduler probably will bring in maybe 10, $100,000 opportunities, the planner's looking at like $1 million, $2 million opportunities, I guess, you know, of how they're going about, you know, tactically executing on the project.
Yeah. So in Europe, probably everywhere else, the scheduler is literally somebody which knows how to use Primavera, or whatever is the tool, can be Microsoft Project, but doesn't really, you know, is actually what you said is, you know, putting stuff in, and that's about it. And then planner, and then again, you then have, you know, junior planner, senior planner, depending on then how you go about it, is when you start then to put the things together, you know, when you, it's not the data entry itself into the tool, but it's then interpreting what is coming out. I must admit, I always have a little bit of an issue with scheduler, but that's just me. But you're right. In America, when I was in the States, scheduler was basically what for me would be a junior planner, or, you know, kind of the one which just does that. For me, sorry, the other question I have for you is then, because we need to throw in the mix also the difference between, you know, project control, for example, and then planning and cost control, which puts another layer of complexity in the knowledge. No, it's true, because you have certain companies where the project control does planning and cost. Then you have, you know, specific ones. So how do you go about that? Because really, you start to see that at the end of this call, probably we will have 100 skill that the planner needs to have or learn.
Oh, I mean, if you want to have a good laugh, if you want to have a really good laugh, get on LinkedIn and just type in entry level scheduler, right? And look at jobs for there. The jobs that are posted are hilarious. Like a lot of these companies are looking for unicorns, right?
Yeah.
The other day I was looking at one wanted 5+ years experience. What entry level person, what scheduler that has 5+ years of experience is going to apply to an entry level scheduler role, right? And sometimes you go through and read these job descriptions and posts, right, that are just, they're crazy. And so, yeah, so to me, I think the project controls, you know, if I was providing mentorship or guidance to someone, I would strongly recommend as you work, you know, maybe you get into the industry as a scheduler, like we can align on that term, the proper term, because that's the easiest entry point.
Yeah.
You know, and you want to do something else, you want to grow. Well, you know who you're sitting next to in the cubicle? Oh, you're sitting next to a QS, you know, and in America, we don't have QSs, but you can talk with them and figure out what they're doing. And you can add that skill under your belt, you know, and whether a company wants to do, you know, like we did it both ways at Google. We had a project controls team that had cost and schedule split out. And then we've had teams where like they were all one together. However you want to do it, it's more strategically just being clear on how you want to execute it. But if I'm providing mentorship to someone, it's 100% no brainer to pick the skill up, right? And I think it's an actual, so for some, it's a much easier skill to pick up because there's less art and there's more science in it, right? you got a $500 million project, you invoice for $10 million, it's $490 million. It's not like, well, this might be the critical path, but it might not be, right? Like that's scheduling, you know what I mean? And so I'd highly recommend picking up the skills, but I think it is pretty interesting when companies go hire schedulers or project controls and how much they throw on there for people to have under their belt. It can be really hard for anyone to pick up that level of skill and be able to demonstrate it through experience, because that's what they're really looking for, right? You can go get a certification or whatever, but if they're like, have you ever been a cost lead or a project controls lead? And you're like, no, they're like, well, we'll hire that guy or gal, so.
Yeah.
So would the Micah degree program of the future, would it almost start off with project controls experience rather than going into some of the more fundamentals of scheduling? So would that be a year one, semester
Yeah.
one thing? Would you almost start generic in terms of the fundamentals of project controls and then go into scheduling, or would you almost have
I'd
that
probably
as a
start with
subset?
I'd start with the fundamentals of construction delivery, right? Just some
Interesting.
basic, high level. This is how most construction projects work. You need to have an owner. That owner needs to want to build something. Once they have an idea how to build it, they need to give people money to go buy land, buy designs, buy that sort of stuff, and then just go forth from there. You got to clear the ground. You got to put in piles. You got to, you got to build the structure, and then you mechanical fit it out and commissioning, like getting people to understand that flow, and then understand the business flow of the project. So how the money's coming in, going out, who's getting paid, who are the vendors on it, how that whole piece works. Then probably go to the people of it, like I said before, because I just feel like that's such a good foundational thing to know, that regardless of where you wanted to then leave and go to in the construction industry, at least you have that breadth of knowledge to be like, oh yeah, I tried scheduling for 6-8 months. It just wasn't my thing. So maybe I can become a project manager, maybe I'm a safety engineer, maybe I can, or if you do become an entry level person, you can just speak about the project, from a point of confidence and understanding of roughly what's going on. Yeah, maybe you don't know like this bus connects into this medium voltage piece or whatever, but that's stuff you can pick up, in the field. And then I would most likely probably go into a little bit of a higher level. This is project controls, but I think you could probably specialize out from there pretty quickly as well too. So I don't know. I'll give you a solid maybe.
That's a good answer. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the fundamental reasons why we still have the gap is exactly what we are talking about. It's very difficult to come up with a curriculum, let's say, which gives you all the information. You will always have somebody say, "Oh, but this is missing," or "Oh, you didn't consider that one," and I think that's one of the reasons why actually there is this big gap. Plus, I still believe that, and I don't know if it's the same experience everywhere. I still believe that it's a very misunderstood position, the one of the planner. I don't know what your views are, but this comes into the whole equation of getting the planner to a level of knowledge which then enables you to actually be recognized. Because let's be honest, up until you don't start to get a little bit of work under your belt, so you go in and they know that you have worked, and you gain basically this kind of status, respect.
Yeah.
It's actually, I can tell you, it's very difficult at the beginning, especially nowadays. It's the planner is always seen as he does the update, he kind of relegates.
Is it the end of the month yet? Has he finished the report yet? Has he or she finished the report yet?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it is that knowledge piece and picking it up, but I think it's also like a cultural piece too, and I think there is something systemically wrong in overall the overall environment, that oftentimes, that the planners' ideas, value, or like what they're bringing to the table isn't actually really respected or utilized, or it's brought so late into the game that it's diminished in value, right? Like at the beginning of the project, you can have huge impact because there's nothing set in stone. right? And then as it goes through it, you get less and less ability to change that, right? And so depending on when you bring in your planners to work on your projects, that can be a thing. And then overall, I think there can be a lot of cultural hurdles to get over to build that respect level up that I just don't see a lot of other people need to do necessarily, that I just from my personal experience. I don't know about y'all's where, different people in different roles in such scenarios kind of seem to be able to get that sort of like focus when they bring up a problem, have a solution, want to go execute on it. And then sometimes I do that on the scheduling side. They're like, you want to spend how much money to do what? And I'm like, yeah, but it saves like $10 million. Why wouldn't we do it? And I don't know, and so.
Yeah, well, it's also linked to the fact that unfortunately, when you do the proper schedule, sometimes you show the truth and sometimes the truth is not.
Yeah.
Well, it's true. And that's one of the reasons, sometimes they just prefer to keep it, as a sort of a reporting tool rather than the actual, working file. And I've seen this times and times again where, the truth is just, we can't really say we are in delay,
That is such an interesting, I mean, I think we've all experienced that. It's such an interesting conundrum to be in where, I mean, I remember I was on one project where like the team literally sat down and did these like really amazing, backwards forward passes, like very granular at the last planner level all the way up. And then we used some basic kind of finger in the air quantity tracking and some critical path analysis. We had this nice system built up. And I don't know, so the project was like 8 months late, right? And like, instead of being like, okay, the project's 8 months late now, let's go react off of this and see what we can do. It's like, no, I think we just, let's just leave it to the earlier date. We'll go forward from there and figure it out. And, month after month, it's like, oh, here's a month and a half, here's 2 months, here's a couple weeks, here's 3 or 4 weeks. And then all of a sudden you end back out where it had been stated. It's such an interesting problem that happens, and it happens everywhere, and it's people know it and they can see it. And I think that comes to me a little bit back towards the client contractor relationship and how that's set up, either contractually or socially. How that dynamics kind of set up is, I think, what really drives a lot of that, right? If you have an owner that's like, you must deliver on time no matter what, blah blah blah, then I think you're going to get that scenario a lot more versus an owner that's more open to, wow, this is a problem, let's work together and see how we can get this addressed and fixed.
So that's probably quite a nice segue into the future part of the topic tonight. So projects in 10, 15 years time are always going to have contractual issues, problems. How do you think technology can help with this, or maybe help some of the marketing issues that we've talked about tonight as kind of schedulers as an industry? What are the things that we're going to be talking about in 10, 15 years time that we're not talking about now, in your opinion?
Oh yeah, this is where you get your notepad out and you get your Google Calendar reminder that we said it 15 years. And Micah was a liar. There are no flying cars here. No, I mean, so like I kind of look at like trajectories, of like where things I think are going from a trajectory place. And so I think, let's start with progress. Let's just look at that component of it. And some people like to brush this off, which I think is very strange. But very quickly in the last several years, we've had these massive advances in automated capture, right? So that goes back to the people wearing the cameras on their heads, walking around the sites, comparing the progress on field, in the field to what's actually happening in the previous capture or to the BIM model, right? And some of these companies veered off and went to quality, and some of them stayed in the progressing field. And so you have companies like Doxel, Avere, Reconstruct, or ConstructU. I think Reconstruct is two of them, and I'm Bill Dots. Apologies to anyone out there if I forgot your company. But this stuff didn't exist 5-6 years ago, right? It just did not actually exist, which is absolutely crazy to think about. And so you have to think about, how is this going to dramatically change how we do it, right? Because I can get someone in here right now and be like, they don't capture like cable pulls and you can't do commissioning with it. And, this doesn't replace a full-time scheduler and like this, that, and the other, right? And I'm like, I'm great, but this is a brand new technology to me. And the innovation and the ability to capture is going to increase by magnitudes that we don't know. Because look at how cell phone cameras went, right? Like you pull up your cell phone camera, like you can take the most ridiculous picture now and it's 10 years later, right? So there's nothing there that suggests to me that this technology won't dramatically improve, right? And so what this enables is us to capture details and level of information about a project that we've never been able to before. And then to automatically tie that to a BIM model and assign the same metadata in a BIM model that's in the BIM model to this port of the schedule and capture, right? To do that manually now is insane. You need so many people to go through, figure out your metadata structure in your BIM model, get it coded to your schedule, make sure these bits and pieces perfectly align, and then put like a gazillion activities in your schedule, right? So to me, when I look at progress capture, I'm like, that could very quickly make that problem become one of the biggest gold mines of this industry because you're going to have very finite, actual, true, usable as built data, right? Like if you went out and shot most of your projects, and let's say you're doing, let's just say the data center space, and you shot 15 of your data centers and you shot weekly captures, you know exactly how these things were built by the bolt. And that's like, to me, is like, boom moment, right? And you start thinking about getting people in other industries that know how to do machine learning, that know how to do some of this advanced compute. And then you can very quickly figure out an optimization model. So when you go create your next schedule, right? Like how long is it going to take? Right. And then what is your optimizations there? And so I think that is like, on the progress side. So I think that that is going to change fundamentally how we build schedules, because I think in the future, very soon, like it's going to be it's going to be a guided experience. Like I just think the level and for most projects, right? And most projects that we're talking about in that size, these days of like starting with a blank P6 schedule and then entering in like permitting WBS and like, construction WBS and commissioning, and then going through all the little activities. I just don't see that existing in the future. I mean, think about, some other technologies we have. You go on Google right now, you start typing, what does it do? It fills in the words for you. That technology has been around for like 8 years now, 9 years now, right? You look at Google Maps, it can get you an accurate location to your destination plus or minus what, 2-3 minutes, right? We have rockets that land themselves. I think there's like 75% or 80% of the money in the stock market's controlled by algorithms, right? I mean, you just kind of look at some of these things that are perfectly in front of us. And that's where I think this is going. And I think that is going to massively change it. And the thing is, when I bring that up with people, this is what they say, right? Like, but you still need people. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, you're going to need people to do this. But I do think that someone's going to come along. People are going to come along and make this much easier, make it more seamless, make it more integrated. And then you're really going to start to see the big changes.
I agree, but I think it depends a lot. So I can see that for certain industries, like I don't know, like for example, I always say, when you do buildings or this kind of stuff, because obviously they are kind of repetitive. Because I remember, for example, and we're talking 2008, 9, we tried at that time to come up, with the template. At that time, obviously, you didn't have AI to do it for you, but let's say to come up, with the fragments or template for. And at the end of the day, only the repeatable parts. So the power island, for example, in a power project, because the GT was always the same, the foundation had to be built in a certain sequence. That's the only part that actually we were able to kind of have a proper, repeatability in the schedule. All the rest, the balance of plant and everything else, was so dependent on the design, on the country where you were building it, and so on. Yeah, we had some snippets at that time, of procurement, which kind of sequence is always the same. How do you see that? Because I always have this question to everybody, which talks about getting to the point, which is I would love to have something where Instead of wasting time at the beginning in building something that you already know how it is, you could, make it much faster. How would how do you see the problem of design dependent? And when I say design dependent, everything is design dependent, but where you do the design, you go through the feed period, you do the design, and then you start to build based on the design. How do you see this? Because I'm really curious, because I always see that as a blocker in a sense for, going the next mile, which is what you were saying, for this type of projects.
Yeah. Well, who's building all the plans today that aren't being delivered, right? That are like consistently late. I think it was like, what's the book that's all over LinkedIn right now? Like how big projects are built, or we'll put it in the show notes, but I think right? And runs the data, a brilliant professor, and all these mega projects are always super late and delayed. Well, who is building these plans? Humans are, people, right? These people aren't using data and AI for most of them. I mean, because they go back through the years. And so when you look at, if you take two scenarios, for example, and the scenario you just mentioned where maybe you don't have like the exact project or data that's available, versus sitting down with just a couple subject matter experts and having them hack it out, right? Like this isn't a mutually exclusive event, right? This is okay, wait a second, right? Yes, we're building some complicated, crazy new nuclear facility, but actually we'll go fusion energy. It's 15 years in the future. We're going fusion, baby. Energy will be free, peace on earth, right? We're building the new fusion power plant. We know what that's going to be built out of. That's going to be built out of concrete. It's going to be out of metal, steel, bolts, right? It's going to be all stuff and the same trades that built the thing down the road that's very close. And so I think to me is like, if you look at the wealth of data, right, you're going to have gray areas on any project, right? But I think you're going to have a better frame of reference, right? Because they'll be able to say, oh, okay, yeah, this is like 30-inch duct instead of 25-inch duct. And when they hung it in a 30-foot ceiling versus a 20-foot ceiling, like this is roughly the productivity rate. And then what you're going to be able to do is have people edit instead of create, right? So looking at, this is my favorite thing to do is like, I would way rather edit a paper than write it from scratch, right? And so if you sit down with a plan and then people are editing the plan, I think you're just going to come up with a higher output, right? And so, yeah, there's going to be areas that are all brand new, right? And there's going to be areas where we're not going to have a ton of data on, but I would rather start from a position of some data, which I think, that book and a lot of the other stuff I've read is, especially on the planning fallacy, right? Having benchmark data, I think they call it reference class data in psychology. Having reference class data immensely improves your ability to plan. Right. And so just having that available, I think is, would be super helpful. The click of the button schedule, I mean, that's a tough one, right? Like it's still, though, to me, it's still feasible. The click of the button schedule is still feasible, right? Because once you take care of first principle scheduling, right? So like you have to build your second floor before your first floor, right? You build in the physical world parameters, then it will just become an optimization game, right? And there's a reason why computers win at chess, they win at Go. They're better at optimizing things. So I don't know. Maybe I'm maybe I'm a little too far out there. Maybe that's 30 years, 40 years. But I just want to understand, do you think that's the trajectory we're on? I guess my question back to you.
So I agree that it's the trajectory. My last question is again very provocative, because
I love it.
We are comparing, as you said, if we have reference from the projects, other projects as built and so on and so forth, you improve. Most of the projects, and now I'm exaggerating a bit, but most of the project, there is a very clear reason why, certain durations, for example, on activity have been longer. And some of them are not captured within the data because they are political, or because there were other stuff, which comes in, which is not data. So if it's something which has to do with the permit or an environmental, permit that you need, everything is brilliant. You can put this into the schedule and improve. But I can guarantee you, and probably not so far off when I say that 70%, especially in the biggest projects, so the real, like here in the UK, the Elizabeth Line, or Crossrail as it's called, or other mega projects and delays which are coming in, you can't really find in the data. And some of this duration are very, very skewed because of other influences which are nowhere. And when I say nowhere, what I mean is these are influences which are, let me say, politically driven, so that you don't have something which you can store into the database to say, by the way, pay attention that this duration was 3 times longer, not because of the problem of productivity or, other things, but because of that. How do you go with that? Because I still have a little bit of an issue or a question mark, not an issue, sorry, a question mark on how well we are able to benchmark, especially when we don't have all the informations related to a specific, duration or.
Yeah. I mean, if that's all we were trying to figure out, the kind of black swan, kind of in the midnight problems that were busting projects, like we'd be in a great place, right? Uh, it's and the reason why I say that is because those are the hardest ones to guess and figure out. Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just too practical in nature, or maybe I'm just a little like been living the scheduler game too long. But you said political in nature. Okay, so it's political funding thing, right? Are they pulling funding? Are they giving a go, no go work? It always leads to something that can be in the schedule. Now, I'm not saying you get great data out of it, because like if you're building a once in a lifetime railway station, that's going to have like funding that's going to stop and pull. But I do think that's where, like a proper risk analysis, and some of those events properly measured in terms of risk could help out there. Right. But yeah, I'm not, there's no way you're going to find like a computer algorithm out there that's going to be like, oh yeah, at this point in time, this political person is going to run for their campaign and say, we hate trains, so get rid of trains. And they're going to unite all of the country against train, and obviously I'm taking that out of control, but yeah, I think it's one of those things that, I think that is a great problem for people to look at and solve, right? I think there's areas where people can really help the planning and scheduling, universe. And that one is a great one. That is a creative problem that I think is so complex and has so many different facets to it, right? That is where people should be focused in trying to figure out and solve, right? Whether you go do Bay 1, Bay 2, or Bay 3 based on how many electricians you have, to me is a math problem that people shouldn't be solving for necessarily. Maybe they look at it at the end and be like, okay, yeah, this actually makes sense. Now go do it. But it's not something that I think is the best use of people's time and their abilities. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. If you find out, let me know.
No, the reason why I was asking this question is because it circles back, and it's quite a nice way of, kind of closing the circle, because the data, the end plan or whatever other company which does, AI on, against the big data. If you start to have, 50% or 60% of the data which are skewed, then obviously you might run the risk of then taking the wrong decision. So you would need then somebody, which if it comes out, I just say something really stupid, that to do a pour, it takes 5 months. Actually, he knows that, probably I need to go to check, a little bit more in detail. Rather, the tool told me that it's, average of 5 months, which comes back to what we were discussing before in terms of knowledge of, for example, the planner, to say, I look at something and they say, okay, it's matched against this data. If the data is skewed, I should still be able to kind of say, that doesn't really make sense. I think it closes quite nicely the loop, because at the end you still have somebody which needs to understand it.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add on to there is I firmly believe the data we need for tomorrow isn't the data we're capturing for today, right? And I think that's another place. I completely agree. Even when we have that point, I completely agree on where you're going with your circle. I do still see people at the center of this, being able to do it. So I don't want to discount anything you just said. I just wanted to add on to it to say that for what I'm talking about, and this is where it's funny to be on LinkedIn and have these conversations go off, and I don't think people realize that what I'm talking about with a lot of these future capabilities, I'm not saying we're even doing them with the tools we have today, right? and like the situation you mentioned, where it's essentially, if I, shortened it down, it's kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? If you have 5-month poor schedules because of rain, tons of rain all the time, or you're doing it in Finland over the winter and you stopped and started, and that was your data source you're using to create this stuff, it's obviously going to create a skewed result, and there's a lot of inaccuracy I see today in just how we traditionally do Primavera P6, right? So like, how many times does a schedule activity, this is my favorite, so I'll give the listeners out there and everyone like the greatest schedule hack of all time. I love this one. It's my favorite one. So you're a scheduler, you're on a project, and maybe you're on the owner's side, or you're called in to review a schedule. This is the scenario, right? And they're like, okay, what do you think of the schedule? And you pick it up, and it doesn't matter. You have the schedule in your hand. You go to any random activity that's more than like 5 days, and go activity A 3648. How'd you come up with the duration? And they'll go, well, we looked at the foundation. And I go, okay, tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me a little bit more about that. And what you'll find is that activity is not even directly connected with anything in the model, right? Someone looked at a picture of the model and was like, yeah, that's zone 2, right? And I think that takes 20 days, right? And that's the P6 activity that's in the schedule. Then it goes out and gets progressed. And someone walks out into the field and is like, ooh, that's about 20% complete, right? Now I get there's like, obviously more sophisticated ways and different, but like, I would be honest with you, that's probably 90% of scheduling out there in the world right now, that's like, it's not directly tied to scope. And then the progress is just a rough estimation. And so that is a interesting set of data that we have. And I would just say, there are magnitudes, right, of like accuracy. And I think it provides a decent one. But again, when I look towards the future, I just see a much higher level of accuracy that we could provide by just getting down into the details, really down into the details, but not doing it in a way that blows things up operationally, right? You don't need 150 people to go do it.
Is there an issue in actually getting the data? So particularly from government funded projects, is that a particular risk in terms of machine learning for the future, just companies actually being willing to share? Does there need to be some kind of mandate for places to
Oh,
share, really? Is that,
Martin
it
with
sounds like a
Martin with the
particular...
Martin with the juicy one. Yeah, that's a. So I had a thought the other day, where I was, um, I think another piece that's limiting our innovation in the construction industry is exactly what you brought up. So I'm going to circle around and finish answering your question, but this is a big issue on innovation, because if you think about it right now, like, hey, I have this great idea for construction startup. I want to do analysis on this or that. You have to then go to construction. You have to either ask InPlan for data or Nodes and Links or a company like that that has a source of data. I think there's another based in the UK, a group that's trying to aggregate a bunch of construction together data. I forget their names, but you have to go to one of these and then try and get permission and get their data. You just can't go out and be free, right? And I think that's a big limiter for people going out and being successful. So my thought process is with government projects, right? Like, we pay for the government project. My hard tax dollar goes into it. And so my whole thought process is, why wouldn't all of the data for government projects actually be open source and free, right? Now, I get there's some stuff that you'd have to restrict and things like that, but like, because the government in itself should be doing this anyways, right? Like, they should have all of these project benchmarked. So if you're going to go build a road, right, there should be publicly viable information that said exactly how every single road, how long it took, like what was the duration of it, what were the activities in it, right? And then just by doing that, so let's say it doesn't exist now, by doing that, right, you could build this amazing data set of construction that could be used in academia and used elsewhere just through the government thing. But to answer your question, yeah, it's a tough one, because there are companies out there right now that are aggregating people's data for them to offer services they can't. And I think that comes down to a business decision. And I see this a lot with companies that are saying no to it, but then also don't have the capability to go do what other companies out there on the market could, right? So to me, it's a question of like, hey, if I'm a GC construction, am I going to go hire a bunch of data scientists to build me an advanced AI progress capture or an advanced AI risk model or an advanced, fill in the dots? And if the answer is no, then you might want to think about investing in one of these companies and handing your data over, because you're not going to do anything with it anyways, right? It's just garbage in your garage that's just collecting dust. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be really interesting to see how it plays out in the future.
Thanks. Yeah, that seems like a good time to wrap up. Sorry, Marco, did you have something there?
I want just to say that I think the tough part is some of it historical, but there is some truth to it. Is also some knowledge which can bring, during the tender stage might actually give you an advantage. So
Yeah.
if you are specialized, I don't know, in tunneling, just making some example, and you have developed, a schedule which, with the years, there is a very big reluctance with actually sharing this, because at the end of the day, the margins are really, 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 really low in construction. We went from 2005, where you were having 20-30% of margin on turnkey projects, and now if you're doing 3-4% is a lot. So I think it's not only not willing to give it, for now, there are other reasons why, for example, public funded the projects are unwilling to share it, where I absolutely am with you. It should be completely transparent. But for a private company which is in the business, to be fair, some of the schedules, informations are kind of the selling point, or helps them get, before the others. So there must be, I think there are ways to still collect data and making sure that, productivity rates and these kinds of things. I think what we are asking is the wrong question at the moment. That's my personal opinion. We are asking, give me the schedule so we can compare it. I'm not so sure that it's the right question. Probably if you would start to say, let's uniform productivity, let's uniform, other kind of information, the people would be more willing to do it. The full schedule, there is still a big.
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly. I do think we're asking the wrong question, but I would say, for my public tax dollar, show me those schedules.
and that's the reason I told you I'm absolutely with you on the public one, especially when you have contracts where you basically pay for work done. Then let's be honest, this should be completely transparent.
Oh yeah.
On other kind of projects or contractual frameworks, PPP, like the ones which are coming out and so on, I can see the reason why there is a little bit of hesitance in giving this information. Do I agree? Oh, yeah. No, but I understand the reasons why there is some hesitance on on them.
Are there ways around it, do you think?
There are other ways around it, in my opinion, because if you would extrapolate it from the schedule itself, because I don't think you need to know what type of project you're doing. I don't think you need to know that the sequence is related to, I don't know, a lifting done somewhere. Let's be honest, if I anonymize completely the schedule and they say that's just, a sequence for a pour or a big pour. Now I'm over making it too simple, but let's say, then nobody has an issue. Let's be honest. It's basically uniform in productivity. Where the issue comes in is when you start to say, we developed this fantastic sequence which enables us to be 30% faster than our competitors. Now you have a problem in giving it, because if all the competitors get it, now the only game you can play is on the money, which is already tight. So that's my view.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's outside of all of that. I mean, if you're looking at a private entity, creating a solution, right, and getting data from other people, and then providing a solution back, there's a value transaction there, and it's just is the value there, and so if the value proposition is high enough with some of these companies that have been on the market for a while, seem to be successful, there is something there that is helping to facilitate that kind of data transfer.
Agreed, 100%.
Seems like we're all in agreement, so good time to wrap up there. Micah, did you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
No, I mean, I think for anyone out there who's considering I guess I will, not no. For all our listeners out there considering a degree in planning or scheduling or project controls, I mean, I think definitely go out there and try and pursue it. I mean, I think for people who are in the industry, let's work to continue to build people's education, help people out along the way, right? Help mentor and guide them, and give technology a shot, right? Have a little pilot, have a little test, be open-minded, go see what changes are coming out in the industry, and don't just immediately write it off, right? Go experience it, go see it, see if, instead of being like, this doesn't work, keep the mindset of like, this is how it could work. Right. And I think that's how we really start advancing and pushing things forward.
Brilliant.
And keep an eye out for Plan Rich as well. That'll be dropping probably in the next couple months. So
we'll do. Please send us a link, and we'll share those links. Marco, any final thoughts for you?
No, I think it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's it's a very complex one. So it would probably go on for another week if we would start to discuss in detail. But I think it's a really interesting one, and I don't think that anybody has nailed it for now, at least, because of everything that we have talked. So it's still a very open.
It sounds like you're saying we need a round two.
Sounds like we are. Get that invite sorted.
Once we have a little water and a snack and a rest, we can go round two.
Exactly.
Looking forward to it already.
All right, gents, it's been a pleasure.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. That's all the time we have for this episode, but please remember, please do help us pay it forward by sharing a link to this episode on your social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, Micah Piippo, and also a massive thank you to Marco for stepping into Dale and Val's shoes. And thank you all for listening. So till next time, we say, stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From Marco and I, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.